Okay, and we're here today. We're going to look at some of the more recent cast iron finds I've gotten. Namely those, I think, over the past 4 or 5 months. Most of these were $1 or $2. The one on the left we'll discuss here in a couple of minutes. Some quick information as far as cast iron and cast iron collecting goes. Pretty much anything made before 1960 is what generally has collector's value. So if you're going to buy it just to use it, a lot of the stuff made through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even the stuff you can buy today at Walmart is actually still pretty good if you're going to use it. If you're actually going to collect it, you want to look at the earlier stuff. A lot of it was hand cast and handmade, which is why it's so valuable. The brands you're going to want to look for is generally going to be Griswold and Wagner, if you can find them. They usually tend to fetch a hefty sum if you can get your hands on them. There's some other ones that can hold some value too. But we'll get into that here in a couple of minutes. I got a couple to show you right now. The first one is actually an interesting one. This one is no markings. It says number 8, 10, and 5/8 inches on the bottom. So I went and I identified it on castironcollector.com, which is a site I'd recommend to anybody. This is actually a Birmingham Stove and Range skillet. This one would have been their Century series, which was made in the mid to late 1960s. It would have been before, I believe, 68, because it does not have a Made in USA stamping on it. This one is also the same thing. Number 5, 8.5 inch Birmingham Stove and Range. These ones were after they added a lot of machining to their processing. I think they actually did sand casting at that point, so it's actually really nice and smooth with rough edges, which is kind of good because these ones didn't rust at all. These were, I think, $1 a piece at a flea market not too long ago. This one is an example of the pre-1960 ones I'm talking about. This is a Favorite Pikaware, number 6. Favorite was, I think they were in Ohio. I'm not certain, but they manufactured cast iron from right around to 1935. I'm not sure when they started. But this is an example of a nice collector's piece. It needs sanded. And if you look, it really kind of needs some seasoning work, namely on the bottom. But the top looks beautiful. It doesn't look like it was used very often. That was another $1 item. This one is kind of the standard what you can find even nowadays. This is actually just a regular old Lodge, 10.5 inch. These ones, you can still buy these at Walmart. I just saw one when I was at Walmart today. This one is a little bit older. This is an example of the post-1960s imports that came from Asia, namely in the 70s. This one had looks like high temperature paint on it that was peeling off, but it needs a good seasoning job. If you flip it over, it's a 5-quart Dutch oven. It was made in Taiwan. So there's nothing real spectacular about that. That was another $1 item. Needs a seasoning job. This one is actually a pretty good example of modern cheap cast iron that you can find. If you look, you can see like really bad machining marks. If you look in it, you can see it's just really bad casting. This is actually, it's a tea kettle, obviously, but it's actually a humidifier kettle for on top of a gas oven range. Helps humidify the room if you're using a range top to heat your room, or namely your kitchen. This one was $1. Normally they're $10 to $12 on Amazon, so it was cheap. If you look, you can see scraping and machining marks all over it. It's junk. This next one actually is going to be my prize piece to cast iron. This one did not come from a flea market at all. This one came from my grandfather's estate, William Bumgartle Sr. We talked about Wagner earlier. This one is an actual Wagner ware. It was made in Sydney, Ohio. If you check the markings on, again, castironcollector.com, they have all kinds of photographs and research aids that should help you find the cast iron or identify the cast iron once you have it. This one is a 1088, which was meant to be their oil fryer for chicken. This one would have been the early 1950s before the company went out of business in 1953. So this is a pretty good example or a hodgepodge of the range of stuff that you can find at your average flea market or your average your average penny sale or your average auction. Prices are going to range. In today's day and age, namely at flea markets, most people know what the value of their items are before they set them out. So it's getting harder and harder to find a deal. You've got that technology at your fingertips. You can Google image search something and figure out exactly what it is. But still, I think I have less than $20 invested in all these pieces. So if nothing else, I'll clean them up, season them, and then get them ready. Seasoning, I'll probably do a video on seasoning some of these, just so you can see how it's done. Most people just use apple cider vinegar and they sand them. or they use apple cider vinegar on a wire wheel, and then they use some kind of cooking oil, and then they put it in the oven.